Thank you all for coming to a late evening or early evening session, I think, late in the day. This is for Insights for ArcGIS, and my name is Art Haddad, and I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Linda Beal.
Hello. You don't have to say that.
It is late in the day. We forgot to order the beer and wine and things of that nature, so apologies. Instead, what we're going to do, we have limited edition Insights stickers. These are not available unless you actually meet with the team, more specifically, meet with one of us. So, we're going to offer them today if you can answer 2 quick questions. First question, and if you heard the plenary, you know the answer to this. How many releases did Insights have last year? 7 it is. Here you go.
He's a winner.
He's a winner. All right, the next one's a little tougher. A little tougher. See that little, congratulations. Those are limited edition. Esri did not make these. The Insights team made those. As a matter of fact, the logo that the Esri team, this is history, the Esri team tried to have us choose a specific logo for Insights, and they spent 3 or 4 months on this. We kind of turned them away. We said no. 2 weeks later, we came up with this, and that's what we went with. That's the importance of these stickers. Second question. If you can see the logo spinning around in that little animated video thing there, who wants to take a guess as to what that truly means? The closest one will get it. And we have literally 1 minute to figure this out. Huh? No. Sorry.
Get out.
See, we can have fun at an Esri conference, right? Yeah. If that's too hard, I can come up with a different question. Different question? All right. Scott, give me a question. Scott Sandusky, by the way, is our product manager for Insights. He's a month old, so let's go easy on him. Month with the team, that is.
What about the one with the ELAs?
Do all enterprise agreements get Insights licenses, yes or no?
Question. Does anyone that has an ELA get, as part of that ELA, a certain amount of Insights licenses? We have an answer right there. No? Incorrect. The question is yes, you do. Jack made that announcement at the last user conference.
I think you should give him the sticker anyway.
Yeah, I think you should get a sticker anyway, because he's the only one that raised his hand.
Yeah, exactly.
Here you go. Cool. Actually, yes, you do. Depending on the amount you spend, you get a certain amount of licenses for every so many dollars or something like that. But anyway, cool. So sorry for a little bit of fun. I just wanted to break it up because it is so late in the day. I wanted to, again, the introductions question.
We've done that.
Oh, are we going to tell you? At the end of the thing, remind me and I will tell you exactly what it is, because we got to get into this thing.
Tell them now, come on.
Tell them now? Ah, man. Okay.
They might want to leave, and then they'll be
Go ahead, Linda, tell
They'll
them.
be lying in bed going, I never found out.
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, so they are the cards. So we have multiple cards that you see in Insights. So they're the 2 cards. And the thing that goes across it, nothing to do with us, is apparently the flow of analysis. I can't believe you guys didn't get that, but you know.
But now you know. You know something that no one else does.
Yes.
Plus the history behind it. So cool.
Right.
Let's go ahead and get into it. We have an hour together. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So with that, who here are analysts? How many people like to answer questions and solve problems? How many people love data? Who doesn't, right? I used to have this saying, but I'm not going to use it right now. In any case, analysis starts with a question, as you all well and know, and sometimes that question is, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is at all. So people do this kind of a thing, right? They find the data, they begin working with it, they begin to explore it, clean and structure it. Sometimes they enrich it, other times they distill it. All the while, rinse and repeat. How many people have done this before with data? Anyone that works with data figures this out quickly, especially if you're using open data. Anyone download open data, try to use it?
Yeah.
A few people. You quickly discover that it gets crazy really, really fast. As part of that process, you quickly figure different things out, right? You start to see the problem. You start to understand what the data can answer. You start to understand what's missing. A big one that I always hear about is, I don't exactly understand the demographics around this area that I'm interested in. So they start to add that information, and then they distill it, ultimately trying to identify what the data is trying to tell them. How many have heard the words data wrangling? Anyone working with data understands they have to wrangle that data to figure it out. Guess what? It's actually a part of your analysis process as defined by the data science process, which is widely accepted by the academic community and now the data science community at large. Ultimately, what we want is to get to that answer somehow, some way. That iterative process, understanding that process, understanding the data and working with it, getting it to the place you need to go, is part of what Insights enables. Everything there, you can pretty much work with Insights, and let me explain some of that. So, you guys have seen this slide, I'm sure. If you attended the partner conference as part of this, then you would have heard Jack talk about this slide as well. Data analytics powered by location. That's a huge topic right there. That one tagline is pretty powerful. How many folks here use data beyond just spatial data? Everyone. It has value, it has merit. With Insights, we enable you to work with all data to perform analysis, but with this geographic context at play. We allow you to not only do this yourself, but you can actually take the simple problems and create a self-service aspect to that and let others operationalize the information on their own. Self-service analysis. You can, like I said, explore all kinds of data, spatial and non-spatial, and more importantly, you can mix those two together and create new pieces of information that you never had before. Again, trying to get to the answers. I mentioned that we work with both spatial and non-spatial. How many folks here have SQL Server? Oracle? SAP? SAP HANA? No? Teradata? We have a Teradata person. And over there, cool. Not many people have Teradata. That's amazing. We work with all those. And if you have geodatabases installed in those, you don't have to publish those as feature services anymore. We can directly connect to the geodatabase and let you work with those tables directly in Insights using a native connection. We try to make it easy. And of course, we work with all the ArcGIS geospatial information that exists within your ArcGIS environment. And of course, Excel, probably the world's most pronounced database out there. Who doesn't use Excel? You don't use Excel. You do use it. Okay. I was going to say, I've never had a hand go up when I asked that question unless they didn't hear the question. Believe it or not, I talk to many, many customers around the world. I sometimes go to them and sometimes they come to us in Redlands. And every one of them has people that extract data from the mythical single source of truth into Excel so they can do what they need to do with it. Crazy, right? So we said we're going to support Excel natively here, as well as CSV and geodatabases and everything else. Along the way, we need to leverage that, there we go. We need to leverage that data to do a number of different things. And as you can see from this chart, we span a lot of different things with Insights. Take a minute and absorb that because that's huge. And we're not even done yet. We're about 14 months old with Insights. We've got a lot on the books. We've had 7 releases in 1 year. And any developers in the crowd? There's a few developers. You guys understand what it means to release a product to masses on an 8-week schedule. With new features, new enhancements, always worrying about performance and continuing to add enhancements along the way. It's huge. So the team is a dedicated set of people, and that's what makes up the team. It's awesome. And to achieve this level of capability in such a short amount of time, being just over a year old, says that we've got a lot that we're going to be doing in 2018 as well. And we're going to talk about that in the roadmap. But some of the things that we're talking about, not only analysis, but also in working with the data. And that's an important thing, because data is critical to the success of your analytic workflow. So we want to make it convenient to work with that data. And that's an important statement. So a lot of different ways we can do that across the board. The first thing is we want to work with all data across the spectrum and bring that into one place so you can begin your analysis. So if I have a SQL Server table working with a feature layer, working with an Excel file, I want to bring all that into one place. And then I want to start performing my analysis against all that data. And the first thing we do in bringing that in is we interrogate that data and infer a semantic model from it. In other words, we identify a role for every field that comes in. And you can see we break it down by qualitative, quantitative, temporal, and a spatial dimension so that you can begin working with that. All by default. Now, what's the importance of this? Why am I even telling you this? Well, because it actually helps us enable a simplicity to the experience in working with data, such that if I start dragging a numeric value onto the page, what's the best way to represent that result? What do you think you want out of that? You want to understand the distribution maybe across it, or maybe you want to understand the age distribution on the age field. What's the best way to represent that? A histogram, exactly. So why doesn't the software do that for you? It's obvious. So by defining a given default to a given field, we can quickly discern the default values based on the information obtained from the data. And that makes the experience that much more clean. Think about that for a minute. The software actually does the work. You don't have to think too much outside of what am I trying to do. If I'm grabbing a measure and I'm dragging it onto the thing, automatically you should think histogram, maybe a box plot. Default, we give you a default. But that doesn't mean you're stuck with that default. The field roles also allow us to identify the different types of ways in which you can view the information, and we enable that quickly. Another thing, let's say I just added an Excel file and I'm working with a feature layer, and I don't have coordinates, I don't have addresses in there, but I do have some kind of a boundary in there. Let's say the feature layer is my custom territories based on the oil fields in my world. And I just have an ID in the Excel file that links back to that table. Should I stop what I'm doing, go over to the DBA's office and say, create me a view of this information now that I added it? Or should you just be able to enable it directly? Creating relationships on the fly, dynamically, is what this is about. Dynamic views. Again, working with data is important. And sometimes you just need to get past a certain point, and you don't want to stop because your mind is already racing down a path. This enables you to create that information visually, dynamically, and on the fly. So a lot of thinking went into the back end of this to enable that kind of work with data in the raw. And to work with the data as is, whether or not you have spatial information in there. But knowing that the majority of data out there has a location element to it, we need to make that simple to enable location with your data. Insights is built to enable that, not just with coordinates, not just with addresses, but we even make available standard administrative boundaries for over 120 countries in the world. Make that available. It's an easy download for your enterprise, or it's available online. You can just add it to your workbook, and you can do some amazing things with it. You can actually enable location on a given Excel table or a SQL table, SQL Server, Oracle, with that boundary file, and now you have a spatial table immediately. And we do all of this inside of Insights. Again, convenience to enable the analysts to get down to the answers and that they require. So, working with all this data, cleaning it up, doing some stuff, seeing what's missing, what's not, all right there inside my workbook. So how do I work with it? As this diagram shows, a lot of it is if you can see it, you can touch it, you should be able to do something with it. As this example shows, I've got my spatial features. I'm interested in an area of interest. Why don't I just grab the feature and drag it over and drop it and filter everything out without having to think about it? Well, let's do that, and that's what we've enabled. Or another example is spatial aggregation. I've got another layer, it's polygons, I got another point, drag the polygons and or points over, and I should be able to have an option of spatially aggregating the information. It's an obvious choice, but the software needs to allow things like that, and so that's what we do. However, we also know that a lot of people know exactly what they want, so we enable that as well. But if you notice, we don't have a lot of menus and a lot of toolbars all over the place that you have to sift through to find what you're looking for. It's right there. I'm interested in this piece of information on a given card. So we have this thing called an action button. And that action button enables you to go straight to the tool of choice. Now, it gives you the context of a lot of spatial tools immediately. However, what if you're a person using this tool, seen as it is familiar and non-disruptive to the non-GIS specialist as well? How do I learn what tools are available to me to take advantage of the geographic context? Well, that's what the second tab is, find answers. We put it in the perspective of a Q&A. Based on a given question, we'll give you all the possible tools, spatial and non-spatial, that can help you in answering those questions. And over time, we're going to continue adding more questions and more capabilities and make those available through this as well. Now, working with data is kind of important. And a lot of people see other analytic software. It's about the visualization. Pick the visualization, add the information. There you go. Style it a little bit. Well, for us, the cards that represent the visual is really a representation of the results of your analysis. And sometimes one visual gives you one perspective, but another visual gives you a whole new perspective. And that's regardless tables, charts, or maps. So once I get the result, and believe it or not, dragging and dropping a measure to create a histogram is actually an analytic operation behind the scenes, and there's a bunch of stuff happening. I should be able to see that histogram, and maybe what I want to do is really quickly identify the outlier, so I want to change it to a box plot. Well, I should be able to do that with a single click. And that's what these cards are. They allow you to drill into that result and continue iterating and asking more questions, because in the end, a question leads to an answer that leads to many more questions that may lead to many more answers. And because of that iterative process, we really want to make it as easy as possible to try and error. So we're very forgiving in this whole space in that everything is, keep in mind, everything is recorded, right? That model, oh, you guys don't know about the model yet. But we're going to show you that model in just a little bit. Everything is being recorded behind the scenes, so that if I do go down a path and I made a mistake, oops, that's okay. A quick undo will take you right back to where you were before. So the analytic environment also needs to enable you to go down paths that you need, and Insights enables all of that as part of its experience. But ultimately, once you get to those answers, what good is it if I can't share the results, or better yet, tell the stories that the data is giving you? And that's what we enable. We enable the sharing of those results a number of different ways. Obviously, Insights is about workbooks, pages, and models. Those are the things that you can share. We have a typo in there. The cards aren't yet shareable. That's coming in the future. That should have been on the road ahead. That's a future thing, sorry. But in fact, a workbook that you're working on can be shared across your organization as an item in your portal. Pages, once I get to a certain set of results, I want to share those pages, I can share those pages instantly. Not just with an Insights user, but with any named user with my organization. The models that get created based on your analytic workflows, those too can be saved, reused with other data, as long as the data types are exactly what it's looking for. So it has to be a number or a string based on what it is you use to generate the model. Other than that, all of these things can be embedded in websites like story maps, SharePoint sites, your own personal website, as long as you share it according to the permissions that you need. So if it's within your organization, everyone has a named user, you're good. If you want to share it publicly, then the data also has to be shared publicly as well, or at least the results of that data need to be shared publicly. With that, let me just stop talking for a minute. How many people have seen Insights in a complete workflow? Okay, well, I think you're going to show which one?
Wildlife strikes.
Ooh, this is a good one. Let me explain why. I want to set her up for a minute, and I know we're running out of time, so
Oh, that's fine.
just really quick. Was it the U.S. Wildlife?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so the APHIS group, an actual federal agency, came to Esri a few years back and wanted to perform an analysis based on wildlife strikes and airline operations. Who here traveled by plane? You might want to pay attention. Okay, but Palm Springs is safe, so you're fine.
You're giving away the punchline.
Yeah, okay, I'll give. Sorry, I kind of messed that up. But we did it using ArcGIS Desktop 5 years ago, right? And it took a baker's dozen set of Python scripts and a really complex model builder to do it. And the plain Joe, outside of a true GIS professional, really couldn't do it on their own. But we did it in ArcGIS Desktop, and it was great. We actually did the same exact demo live in front of Jack Dangerman and the other directors here at Esri in 20 minutes using Insights. All drag and drop. And with that, we're going to try to do it in less time, which means she's going to shortcut a couple of them. But she's going to do this in less time in front of you here today. With that, number 3.
Flip me over.
You're flipped.
Okay, so wildlife strikes. So I am going to add in my data for wildlife strikes. I'm going to try and go through everything here. So you can bring in your data from multiple different places. I actually have my data stored within a SQL Server database. Just to mention as I'm doing this, so Insights is now available in both online and enterprise. The only difference you'll see is if you're working with the online one, you can't connect to your own databases because obviously we're not in your organization. So that's one difference that you will notice, but assuming you're in your organization, you'll be able to connect into these databases. So I'm adding in data on these strike reports, so where animals have hit an aeroplane. So you'll see, first of all, when I open up the layer, that we have done the semantic modeling, so you can see the type of data that we have. You can change them, so something like index number is stored as a number. I mean, it makes sense, it is a number. But it's also a unique variable. So I actually want to change that to a string because, as Art's already explained, depending on the data type here will determine the defaults that we actually use within it. But we can immediately start to explore this data. And first thing we can have a look at is I could drag across the incident date. Let's see how long this data actually runs for. Okay, now we can see that it's from 1990. And it obviously increased a lot. Now with the date fields, within the database there is only one field for date. There is incident date, which has everything down to the minute. But we actually automatically break out those date components. So you can start to work with all of them immediately. You don't have to pull out year, month, day of week, whatever, when you're doing your analysis. So now very clearly on this data we can see it's been increasing since 1990. 2016, not many records. So now I have some idea not to use or not to trust the results from 2016 because there's not so much information there. I can also have a look at something to try and find, because my data here I can see has no spatial component. It's just a table of data that I'm working with. So I want to have a look in this and see what I could maybe work with spatially. So I have this thing called airport. So I'm going to put that on a table. And now we can see just by dragging airport that it's automatically done the count by each one of those. So this table is essentially a pivot table. It's turned my data around and it's given me this count of the number of strikes by each one of these airports. I'm also going to have a look at the phase of flight. I'm just going to sort that. And now we get a good understanding that most of these strikes have occurred at or very near an airport. So we've got it at the approach, the takeoff, the landing. So now I've got a good concept that this airport is really where the location is that these events are happening. Just to show you a nice example of how we can use the default settings. So all of those I was using categorical variables. But imagine if I take two numeric variables, you'll see that immediately defaults to a scatter plot. That's the only type of chart that we can create, or that really anyone can create with two numeric variables. So it automatically does that for me. The data spans a very wide range. So clicking on the axis allows me to log that data. So now I can see that distribution a lot better. So you get the idea here that all of the different parts of Insights you can click on, you don't have to go away. If I want to change the axis, I want to click on the axis itself. So I've got this flat table of data. I have my spatial field of airports. So I actually want to join those two together. So I'm going to go into create relationships. I'm going to take my airports. I'm going to click on my strike reports. Immediately it's pulled out the first field that's in common. I can change this, so I can go in and add more, but I do want to join those on airport ID. Let me move these across. So now you'll see that if I drag that, I now have the option not only to create a table or chart, but I can also map that data.
Linda, can I ask you a quick question?
Of course you can.
Is this a geodatabase SQL server?
I don't even know the answer to that. But it could be.
It could be.
I know that.
But in fact, what she's showing is native SQL Server with native SQL Server types being used to do all this work.
Right. So I've dragged my point locations of airports, but you can see here at each one of these airports, we have a count of the strikes. So this map's not telling me all my information. Fortunately for me, we automatically count that up just as we did with the pivot table. So if I scroll down here, I have a new field. So it's done this calculation. I didn't have to do any kind of summary. It just does it for me. I can change that information, and now I have that sum of counts for each one of my airports. So I can take this field, this data set that I've created, joining these two tables together, and I can move it across to the next page if I wanted to, so I can do my analysis based on that. So I have this count of airports at each of these locations. So now I want to understand that distribution. So I want to see the patterns across this. One way I can do this very quickly is to go into my tools, so in my action button, and I can run the calculate density on that count of strikes. But what I've actually done is gone a little step further here, and I've actually added a filter to this. So I've filtered out on each of these cards. So you'll see if I click on each one, I have a filter on each one. One of them I've filtered out where there was a damaging strike, so where it caused a damage to the aeroplane, and one of them where it caused no damage to the aeroplane. So being able to filter on the card allows me to have a side-by-side comparison. Now I can add in filters. You'll see I can add in filters on the data pane here. If I added the filter on the data pane, it would mean it would restrict all of the data for all the downstream analysis. Doing the filter on the card allows me to do that side-by-side comparison. So in this card now, I can see that distribution of where there were non-damaging strikes, and I can see that a lot have occurred in Denver, not so many, let's say, down here in Florida. If I compare that to the distribution that I see of damaging strikes, you see that the ones we have in Denver are not very damaging, which contrasts significantly with the ones that we have down in Florida. So there's a lot of damaging strikes down in Florida. So let's go in and explore this a little bit. I'm going to explore this by the airport regions, and I'm going to have a look at the size of the birds. Now you can see that this is actually a categorical variable, so they haven't stored this by the actual size. So I'm actually going to use something called a chord diagram here. And this now allows us to compare two categorical variables. So we could have a look at, let me click on that so you can see where it is. We could have a look at the regions that I was saying, like Denver, where we saw a lot of strikes, but they weren't very damaging. So we can see that there were 6,500 small birds, and if I have a look at the large birds, there were only 548 large birds. Let's contrast that with the Florida region, so down in Orlando, where we have 6,000 small birds, and here you see the difference that we have 1,500 large birds. So that explains the spatial pattern that we're seeing, the difference that we're seeing, but actually we explored it using the chord diagram to help us understand that spatial distribution. So we want to take this a little bit further now, and we can see that we have these strike reports. We know the pattern that we have by year is increasing over time, but it may be because there's a lot more aeroplanes taking off and landing. So the number of total operations at each one of these airports. So we actually see that these number of, let's just put that on a single chart, the number of airport operations, struggling over my words here, is actually decreasing over time, but the number of strikes are increasing over time. But what I want to do is take that into account. So I'm going to take my strike reports, and I'm going to take the year, I'm going to take the airport ID, if I can find it, and I'm going to create a summary table. So I've pivoted my data so that I now have it by year and by airport. So I've got a temporal and a spatial breakdown on that data. I'm going to do exactly the same for my operations. So I'm going to take the year, the airport ID, and the total number of operations, that is the takeoff and landings, and create another table. So it's pivoted again, spatially and temporally. I'm going to join those two data sets together on airport ID. Now remember, I want to take into account the year, so I'm also going to do a compound join on the year. So now I have that joined by location and by time. I'm going to create a whole new data set based on that. Oh, I want to jump back in because I want to make that spatial. Otherwise, I won't be able to map it. So now I have all of that information joined. You'll see that I can create the strike of reports, the strike of operations. I am able to put both of those two on the same map, compare those distributions. But actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead, and I'm actually going to go in and calculate the rate that we see. So I can view the data table there. So this is slightly different from the summary table. This is the actual attribute table that you have behind the data. So I'm going to calculate that rate. So this is taking into account the number of strikes against aeroplanes against the total number of operations. I'm just going to multiply it up so we have a reasonable number to look at. And now you can see that strike rate that we have. And now I should be able to map that strike rate, and that is then quantifying that result. I want to make that the average rate. So now we can pick out those areas that have poor rates compared to other locations. If I want to explore that in a different way, let's have a look at this by district code, and oh, I want to drag my layer across, don't I? The one I just calculated the rate on. That on new page. So I want to take the district code, the year, and I want to take the rate, and I'm going to create something called a heat chart. Let me just show the average rate. And now we can see both spatially and temporally where the rate of wildlife striking aeroplanes has got worse. So you can see the region of Honolulu used to be very bad and has actually got significantly better. whereas somewhere like Memphis, we actually see has been getting worse over time. So that's allowing us to explore both spatial and temporal patterns within the same data set. And that's really through wrangling the data behind the scenes, pivoting that data into a new way of actually seeing that data. We can also have a look at this, since we're talking about birds, they migrate. So I want to have a look at this by region. Just scrolling up and down to find the region. And let's take month, and let me see a data clock. And now we can actually start to look at the seasonal patterns that may exist within that data. So we're seeing different of those regions have different times of different months of the year when they need to be concerned about birds probably migrating through that location that they have. So we've already picked out a lot of temporal patterns, spatial patterns. We've explained some of the answers. We have, of course, recorded everything we've done. So when I get the data in for 2016, I can easily rerun this analysis with the new data set. And just to finish on something fun, because I've been careful to say wildlife throughout the whole thing, and you're probably all wondering why I didn't say birds, because we all know birds hit. Actually, the reality is in this data set, there's some amazing animals hitting aeroplanes. Who knew that white-tailed deer hit aeroplanes? Or even, I don't know, coyotes, striped skunks. So when you're sitting on the runway, look out the window. Okay, that's me.
All right.
I think.
So that was an actual analysis that included the spatial aspect with a non-geodatabase SQL server. We can do the same thing with geodatabases. We can do the same thing with feature layers. But the importance of that was one question started leading you down the path, and you were quickly able to figure it out. Another thing that I'd like to point out is as you're creating these new pivot tables, and like what she was doing there, it actually created new information that was added to your data pane that she then used to create new views to answer even more questions that weren't there before. I don't know many other analytics software out there. As a matter of fact, I don't think that anyone actually gives you that capability directly. One other thing that I'd like to point out with Insights, as you all know, being in an ArcGIS conference, generally speaking, a layer has only one shape type, one shape column. With Insights, you can have multiple shape columns per data set in a workbook.
I can show that in the Roadhead bit.
Okay, in the Roadhead, we're going to show that.
Yep.
But just keep that in mind. There's infinite number of possibilities now that are available to you in working your analytic process with ArcGIS and Insights now. Okay? And I think we're going to dive right into. You're on? Yep, using Insights for analysis. Go ahead.
Tap away. I'll be as quick as I can because most of this is just really a summary. So selections and filters, we can do all of that both on the data pane and on the cards as I've showed you. We can do spatial filters as you've seen using drag and drop. There's also all the kind of drawing capabilities, so you can show it by a square, lasso, whatever. You can do interactivity is set up automatically between all the cards, so you will see that. The legends are also completely interactive, so you can click on the legends and it will select things out in your data. You can change all the different card types, so when you create a map, you can easily switch that to a chart or to a table. So we change between all of those visualization types. It's not that you're then set into the one that you've created. Okay.
Oops.
Go.
Yep.
The spatial analysis tools, so we think very carefully about the tools that we put in. We're trying to keep it as simple as we can in terms of the UI. So some of these things have a lot of hidden capabilities. Good example is the buffers. So we do fixed distance buffers, we do drive times, we do trucking times, we do driving distances, we do overlapping, we do dissolve buffers. There's a lot of tools just in the one button that you can click into. And there's a lot more in each one of those tools. So even though there's not a whole host of them, There are quite a lot of ability we can do in there. Part of that is also using the results layers as you've already seen. So remember, as you're actually creating these visualizations, in any time that we actually have to change the data in any way, and you consider something like even a bar chart, we're having to aggregate the number of times something falls within a category. That's actually a new way of having that data. You didn't originally have it in that format. We will give you that result layer. You can use that result layer in any of the further analysis, or of course you can share that back out to the portal and use it anywhere else. We're creating a layer for you. Yep. So the other thing, just to reiterate, we're recording every single thing you do. You can share those models back to the portal. You can rerun the model. You can bring it back in. If the data is connected to something live, such as data I have within my database, or even feature services that you have, and those things update, you've changed them in any way, you can press update on the model and it will run all the downstream analysis automatically. It's a manual update. It's not going to change on you without you doing it. But if you click it, as I say, it will rerun the whole of that analysis. So I also created this sort of lookup cheat sheet that will help you understand, because we have multiple different visualizations. This combines using the charts, using the maps, as to what each one can do, when it's useful to use it, so that you have a good idea of how you can change between them, and also gives you a clue as to what defaults you would expect to come up and how useful that might be. And that is available to download as well on the website.
And it's localized into many different languages. I don't recall the number, like how many?
15.
About 15 different languages already. And we can do more if need be, but the response from the field on requesting this one infographic has been tremendous.
That's me.
That's you.
See?
Cool.
Efficient today, aren't I?
Yes, we are, given that it's late in the day and we want to get through all this information. So this is the part that's kind of fun, because we're going to actually share with you some stuff that I haven't even showed Jack yet.
You're going to get into trouble.
Yes, and that's okay. Forgiveness better than permission?
Oh, okay. That's it. That's what
that's
they
the
say.
rule. That's the rule. Cool. Anyway, I want to credit this slide with Scott Sandusky, because he's the one that created it, because in general, I don't like to talk about the road ahead. In general, Insights team doesn't plan the next release until we're just about done with the current release. This way we can stay as agile as possible. But a lot of people on the business side love to know what's coming. So I was able to define high level what we're doing up to the user conference. All of this is subject to change, but we are coming out with another release in early April. So we've already released in December, released again in January. We're going to release in April, only because we have to line up with online for a few things, or else it'd be a little bit different. And in that release, we're doing a few new things. We're adding regression, we're adding scatter plot matrices, we're adding link analysis, which is inclusive of link charts and link maps. That's an interesting one. If you haven't looked into link analysis, that's a huge one, understanding relationships across people, objects, places, and events. We're going to continue evolving that into our user conference release. The number says 2.4. It might actually evolve to 3.0 given the level of functionality that we're adding. And that's where we're also talking about this thing known as a personal edition. Insights, as you know, is a browser-based application running in both enterprise and online, but we're also thinking about a personal edition, basically a standalone version of this running on both Mac and Windows. Cool. I'll actually show you that in just a minute. We're going to continue adding more analytic capabilities. That's where we're going to actually able, in ArcGIS Online, the ability to talk to other cloud databases like SAP HANA Cloud, other SQL Azure. We're going to continue opening that door even further. And there's a number of new things that we're going to be doing on premises and online along the way. But you can see our schedule is pretty radical, especially if you're a developer. You understand what that means. But we are very aggressive, we're very agile. As a matter of fact, we've evolved our processes internally into something I call work streams. Essentially, to get the idea, think asynchronous scrums, but done in such a way that it's well organized, well understood, and a small team focuses on a given aspect across new features, enhancements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you're interested in that, find me tomorrow and I can give you some more details. But it does work. And it lets us get out there pretty quick. Nonetheless, let's do a couple of quick demos. First, can we do the link thing? Link maps?
Yes, we can.
We can? Can I switch over to you first?
Yeah. I got it all in hand. It's all fine.
Cool. This is interesting.
Do you want me to do the relationships as well? Scatterplot?
Yeah, quickly.
Yeah? Okay. Scatterplot matrices.
And the importance of that is?
If you're going to do any kind of prediction, and for example, if you're going to do regression, which we're going to be putting in, then you want to see the pattern. So all I needed to do was drag, you see if I hover there a little bit, 4 numeric variables, and it says, do you want to create a scatterplot matrix? And yes, I do. And we have the R squared up here. If I want to dive into one of these a little bit more, drag it out, and then I've got the scatterplot. Don't forget, we always give statistics on the back of all of our charts as well, and on our maps. So we have everything there. And you said link maps. So in here, so this is fatal traffic accidents, and we have the XY coordinate of where the fatality, where the accident occurred. We also have the zip code where the driver actually lives. So we can take these 2 shape columns, as Art said, they're in one layer. We can have multiple ones in a layer. If I have 2 of them, I drag them to a map. You will see we will immediately create that relationship between the 2. There you go. So now I can see from that zip code where all the accidents happened. Let me pick one that goes a little bit further away. So this poor person drove all the way from LA and had an accident out here. Zooming in, you can start to see these patterns. So you can see from the zip code where everybody traveled from that zip code out. Okay.
Something of a little importance about the link map and the fatality accident. Believe it or not, we spoke to a chief intelligence officer from a state here in the U.S. They actually study fatalities as it relates to not only crime but also mortality. They're trying to figure out if an accident closer to a medical facility will help remove a number of fatalities or lower the number of fatalities. So they actually study this kind of information, but they've never been able to see it in this kind of a way, let alone the other way.
The other way?
Yeah,
there's more?
There's one more.
Okay. All right.
More.
I'm going to be
so
doing this
easily.
one live.
Usually they have to spend lots of zeros behind a dollar sign to get this kind of capability, and we're actually giving it out of the box.
Okay, I'm going to start slowly on this one.
Yes.
So 2 categorical variables. Again, trying to explain, understand the relationship, links between them maybe. You saw me do a chord diagram before. Now I'm going to do a link chart. So now I can see those relationships between different variables that I've put in. So let's go back to that one we did before with the zip codes. So I'm going to take whether they've been involved in a previous accident. And this is where it really gets fun. Let me make that bigger. So now we can see all of those people who've been involved in speeding, the zip codes that they lived at, and we can see those relationships. So people living at this zip code have been involved in all of these types of prior incidents. And you can see the size of it depends on the number of people who were involved.
Yep, and so that link chart actually includes a number of different graph statistics like betweenness, closeness, degree, in and out, directionality, all those other things that help in understanding relationships across people, objects, places, and events, i.e. entities. we're evolving this, and we're going to continue evolving this into the future. But until now, COTS product doesn't really have this functionality with this level of ease. And from where we saw it, it's just going to make a lot of operational intelligence analysts just sing, which is good. So one more demo, or I'm sorry, filtering too. I mean, obviously this all works. So if I want to filter it across using...
Yeah. I don't know
can-
if I've got this set up, but yeah. Yeah, there you go.
So you can obviously see how this can work. So you can have maps with link maps in there. You can be selecting around. The charts will automatically update based on what you're doing, not only in selection mode, but also through cross-filtering, all built into the system. Let me just switch over one more. Now, this is running on my Mac. And let me end the show here really quick.
You just always like to steal the show, don't you?
No, I don't. You're more than welcome to show this. And what I'm going to do here, you'll see up at the very top this Wi-Fi. I'm going to turn it off. No Wi-Fi. Now, Insights is a browser-based app, right? Except it's now actually down here on my dock, on my Mac dock. Selecting it, clicking it. Ignore this little developer thing here. There you go. I got a menu and everything, right? I got my workbooks. Let me actually take it full screen on the Mac. Do a new workbook. There it goes. I've only enabled Excel CSV. This is very, very alpha, so everything else is disabled. Let me go ahead and bring in something from my desktop. College facts. This is from our Learn exercise. And let me open that up. Add it. It was that quick. All done. Bring it in, and you'll see here I do have an XY. Obviously I can work with it directly. Let me just go ahead and enable that. Sure enough, it picked it up. It's done. Creating a map. Oh!
Boom.
It was supposed to work.
You know I jinxed it.
Yeah. Okay. But I can still do other things like state and conference.
At
Bring
least
that
they
in.
believe us now that this is real.
This is live demo. This is, let me go ahead and just, what is this, a chord diagram? Yeah, just do a chord diagram. There you go. I can do things. Still working out a bunch of stuff. Just grab a couple of things here. Now I'm doing stupid stuff, but I can do stuff with it, including, getting some stats. Obviously, there's no relationship there.
No,
Not that I really. Yeah. But anyway, the models are all there. Standalone personal edition. We're leaning towards this. We're trying to figure it out. Hopefully by the user conference we'll have something available. Either way.
I don't think they want it. There's no reaction at all. Nothing.
No one likes it.
No. There you go.
How many Mac users are out there that wanted something native on the Mac? I mean, come on. All right. Outside of that, we're 6:25. We're 5 minutes into the left in the hour, but we can take a couple of questions if there are any. If not, we'll be here. There's definitely a question. Good. Yes, sir.
Yes, how's the personal edition going to be licensed?
To be determined. Any licensing questions on this is to be determined. If anything, we'll start announcing things closer towards the user conference. But if you have any ideas, Scott Sandusky here really wants to hear them. Sir.
You showed that you can share into pages, you can share it to story notes.
Yes.
With embedding that regular web pages.
The question was, we talked about sharing pages and embedding them into story maps. Can I just share them in any web page? The answer is yes. It's an iframe. You can do with it what you want. There you go. Sir?
What industries are using Insights the most?
I'm sorry, I didn't
What
hear.
industries are using Insights the most?
Well, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. What industries? All of them. That's the problem. We actually originally designed Insights with the horizontal in mind. We have quite a few sectors with many industries at Esri, and we, at the very beginning, interviewed a number of different analysts from a number of different industries. So this is designed to be general purpose across all of them. With that said, a number of verticals have picked it up and ran with it. So we have a number of different users. Which industry are you from?
I'm across as well.
You're across as well. This will work. Yeah.
For Esri Institute 20%.
Okay. Yeah. In terms of industries, we haven't found an industry this doesn't work for yet. And if you do, we'd like to hear about it. Cool. Over here.
How does it work with big data? Is there limitations on getting people into it?
Yeah, so the question is on size of data. Let me ask you a question. What constitutes big data for you?
That's kind of like real-time data stream coming in.
So things like GeoEvent would deal with, like 2 million feeds a minute kind of a thing, right? Right, so what we do, we have in the ArcGIS system capabilities to handle those kinds of real-time feeds through GeoEvent, and that comes into a data store from which we know how to work with directly. Now, we'll work with the data as it exists inside the data store, but the stream itself, we typically leave that for GeoEvent, and that brings it in. So anything that's in the data store, we can start operating against. Does that help? Now, in terms of big data, that's a very good topic. Quite honestly, I haven't met little data yet. It's subjective as well, because in a lot of organizations, 6 million records to them is big data. Others, it's 100 million records. Others, it's an Excel spreadsheet with 100,000 records. You know, for them to be able to do things as quickly as possible is important. In terms of performance on that scale, it all depends on the hardware, the sizing, a bunch of environmental variables that you're working with. If you're trying to do analysis with 100 people on a desktop machine with only 32 gig of RAM, you're probably asking for some trouble. But now if you scale that out for the 100 people based on the size of data, be it tall, wide, short, fat, whatever it may be, and size the system correctly with the right data engines backing you up, we can do amazing things with Insights. So it's going to be as slow as the weakest link in the chain, if you will. Same answer that you get with any enterprise architectural discussion. Fair? We can talk more later. Sir?
Yeah, you talked about refreshing or rerunning the model is a manual process?
Today, yes.
Today, okay.
Right.
And then the question is, if you are embedding that, then are you getting a snapshot of what the result was when that last was run?
Yeah. So the answer is, when you share a page, it'll take, at that point in time, a snapshot of only the results necessary to regenerate the page based on the type of interactivity you've configured on that page when shared. So if all you're doing is a default selection state, only the results are shared out. However, if it's cross-filtering, then we need access to a little bit more than that. So we'll keep the live connection back to the data of which you need to understand. And we can talk more about that later. But cross-filtering, you can imagine I'm picking any one of the variables and I can have a number of variables in one of those charts, and I click on it, all of a sudden the map has to reflect the area of interest or the category on the chart that you've selected. Well, that has to bring in that information if it's not there yet, right? And you can imagine if we bin the data where it's actually showing a representation of all 100 million records in your data store, well, then we have to filter that data and then recalculate the bins accordingly, right? So there's a lot to it, but we try to take that into account and make that available so you know everything. Fair? And the automation of that is coming. And that's where you can start thinking about how we can extend Insights through automation, and you can start thinking like Python scripts and whatnot. All that's in 2018 that we're trying to get to. Fair? Let me come back over here. Is there any questions over here? There's one right there.
Between 30,000, that was the smallest one. I'm just having a look. I've done demos up to 1 million. I'm just adding in that data set. The one that I just showed with the linked stuff, that was 34,000. I know that one off the top of my head. This one, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, we had to add it to SQL Server at the time, and then it's just working with SQL Server. The wildlife strike and the impacts?
180,000.
And that was working with the server back in Redlands. So
It's 6:30 if anyone wants
it
to
is
speak.
6:30, so we're going to have to hold, but we'll be up here for a little bit if you have any questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for attending so late in the day.